اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد. خل المقادير تمضي لا تغالبها، فإن من غالب الأقدار مغلوب. إن القضاء لسيف لا يقاومه شيء من الخلق إلا وهو محبوب. وامشي رويدا مع الأقدار في مهل، فإن من يكره الأقدار متعوب. سلم وفوض لحكم الله محتسبا، فإنما الأمر مقضي ومكتوب. والله يقضي بما شاء وكيف يشاء، والعبد عبد ومخلوق ومربوب. ولم يزل ربه الرحمن يكلأه باللطف والحفظ محفوف ومصحوب. حسن ظنونك بالرب الكريم، ولا تسيء ظنا فتبقى عنه محجوب. واعمل لنفسك أعمالا تسر بها، فكل ما يفعل الإنسان محسوب. إن كان خيرا فخير سوف يحصده، أو كان شرا فتنكيل وتعذيب. يا ويل من ضيع الأعمار في زلل، وكل من كسبه الآثام والحوب. واطلب علوما مع إقبال مع عمل، فأنت بالعلم والأعمال مطلوب. واحذر زمانك هذا إنه زمن به المناكير شاعت والمعايب. فكن وحيدا فريدا خاملا حذرا، فإن فيه الأقاويل الأكاذيب. والظلم فاش بلا لوم ولا نكر، وللمساكين تخويف وترهيب. فكن لبيتك حلسا لا تفارقه، إلا لشيء له في الشرع تصويب. واذكر إلهك ذكرا دائما أبدا، فالذكر بالذكر مقرون ومصحوب. وذاكر الله يجالسه، فاجلس مع الله تأتيك المواهب. واطلب من الله ما تحتاج أجمعه، فالخير يا ذا لديه والمطالب. لا تسأل الله كريم الوجه خالقنا، فعنده الفضل والإحسان مسكوب. واعكف على بابه في كل ما نفس، فإن نسيانه يا صاحبي حوب. وكن أخي بحبل الله معتصما، فكل حبل سواه فهو مقطوب. واسلك على سنة الهادي تفوز، وفي أولاك ترضى وفي أخراك محبوب. ففي اتباع النبي الخير أجمعه، عليه منا صلاة ربي يدوب. تغشاه والآل والأصحاب أجمعهم، ومن لمذهبهم في الخير منسوب. والحمد لله رب العالمين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity for us to continue in our lesson in Muqaddimah Hadramiyyah, and we are still in the chapter of janazah, which speaks about guling with regard to the disease. So in our last lesson we spoke about bathing the disease. We spoke about the rulings in bathing of the disease, and the author mentioned that bathing is fardu kifaya, likewise shrouding and performing the prayers for the disease and burial. All these things are considered to be fardu kifaya. It is a communal obligation. So if a Muslim pass away in a town or city, there must be people who perform all these rites when it comes to the disease. Today, inshallah ta'ala, from where we stop in our lesson, we will enter into the chapter on shrouding of the disease. So the author mentioned bathing. After that, he mentioned about the obligation of shrouding. It is important for us to take note that in all any situations, it is not permissible for us to uncover the aura of the disease. Whether we are speaking about bathing the disease, shrouding the disease must be always be covered. The disease must always be covered. The aura must be covered, and this is an obligation. And it is not any permissible for the person who is bathing the disease to touch any of the private parts of the disease. So this is a thing that we have to understand. So the author mentioned faslun wa aqallul kafani sawbun. The minimum shroud is a piece of cloth. A piece of cloth in a way that it is able to cover the disease. This is the minimal obligation. The minimal obligation is a piece of cloth that covers the aura of the disease. So he said satirun lil awrati. So the ruling when comes to covering of the aura is the same as a person who is living. So there is no difference between a person who is living and a person who has passed away with regards to covering of the aura. Just like we say that it is wajib for a person who is living to cover the aura, likewise it is wajib for us to make sure that the aura of the disease is covered. So the minimum obligation pertaining to kafan is a piece of cloth that covers the aura of the disease. So when comes to men, the aura is the navel from the navel to the knee, and for the woman is the whole body except the face and the hands. So this is the minimal obligation. But when comes to the sunnah, the author mentioned sunnah is to use 3 cloths of kafan. So he said wa yusannu li rajuli salasu lafaif. Salasu lafaif. So we use 3 sets of cloth for a man to cover his body. Walil mar'ati khamsatun. But when comes to the woman who is a disease, there is 5. Summa qamisun, summa khimar, summa lafafatan. Yani izar, qamis, khimar, lafafatan. So we have the 2 cloth that is wrapped around the body, and then we have the izar. Izar is a cloth that is worn below. And then qamis. Qamis is a long dress that is worn. And then khimar is a dress that is a cloth that is used to cover the head and part of the upper body. So altogether there are 5 pieces of cloth for the woman. So izar, khimar, qamis, lafafatan. Yani 2 sets of cloth together with izar, qamis, and the upper cloth that covers the upper body. So this is the sunnah. So here the author is saying what is the obligation and what is the sunnah. Now, I will put in the slides for the book. Okay, so this is where we are. So for those who have the book, you can refer to page 143. So the author is making the distinguishment between what is wajib and what is sunnah. So what is wajib is covering of the aura. What is the sunnah? When comes to the man, 3 sets. When comes to the woman, 5 sets. And that's what he mentioned. Wal bayadu wal marsulu wal qutnu afdalu. So when comes to the kafan, the best of course is white in color, because the Prophet ﷺ specifically he mentioned about white, and the Prophet he mentioned ilbasul bayad, wear white clothes, because فَإِنَّهُ أَتْقَى وَأَنْقَى أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, because it is this good omen that we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala washes away the sins of the deceased, just like the cleanliness of the white cloth. The cleanliness of the white cloth. The Prophet ﷺ will make dua, Allahumma naqihi min az-zunubi kama yunaqqa as-sawbul abyadu min ad-danas. Oh Allah, forgive his sins, wash away his sins, how dirt is washed away from white clothes. So the Prophet ﷺ loved white, and the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that it is close to taqwa, and especially for the deceased, this is a good omen. What is the meaning of good omen? This Arabic, we call it tafa'ul. Good omen in the sense that we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive his sins, just like how this cloth is white in color, where there is no dirt that appears on it. So it is a sunnah to use white. But if a person, for example, uses other than white, then it is permissible. It is permissible. What is important is the covering of the awrah. Wal marsulu wal qutnu afdal. When comes into the kafan that is washed, it is better. It is better. Better than jadid, than something that is new. Wal qutnu afdal. Wal qutn afdal. Cotton is the best to use cotton, because all these things we go back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. What is the cloth that shrouds the Prophet ﷺ. So these are the characteristics of that. The characteristics of that cloth. وَيُبَخَّرُ بِعُودٍ. It is a sunnah to do tabkhir. Tabkhir is to use bukhur. Basically is to make the place sweet smelling. Sweet smelling. Nowadays we have a lot of things that we can use to make the room sweet smelling. Last time they use bukhur. Nowadays you have this for example aromatherapy, what we call it, the device, and other devices. But the thing here is to make the room sweet smelling. Because why? When we are doing the bathing, there is tendencies there will be filth that comes out from the body of the deceased. All these things will bring about a foul smell. So the person who is doing the bathing should make sure that the room must be compensated with something that is sweet smelling, to deter the foul smells. And one of the ways is to use bukhur. Of course, this is one of the best ways to use bukhur, because the smell of the bukhur is strong. The smell of the bukhur is strong. Or otherwise, any other types of perfume that can deter the smell of the deceased. So it is a sunnah to use this da'un due to its sweet smelling. Wal afdalu an yahmil al janazata khamsatun. Then the author mentioned once we have shrouded the deceased. So it is a sunnah to put also perfume in between shrouds. In between shrouds. So for example, when we do the first shroud, and we cover the deceased with the first kafan. Tamam. So in between the kafan we put perfume in between. Usually last time what they do is they put something that is called hanut. Hanut is a type of a plant that is sweet smelling. Like nowadays people sometimes put jasmine or some sweet smelling flowers, or even perfume in between the kafan. All these things to deter the smell, and to give the deceased a sweet smelling smell. Likewise, when it comes to the third, in between the second and the third, also we put perfume. So this is the sunnah. So we what you call it, shroud the deceased all the way up to the head, cover except for the face. And then when comes to carrying the janazah, so he mentioned khamsa wal mashyu qaddamaha bi qurbiha wal isra'u biha. So 5 people is ideal to carry the janazah. So 2 at the sides, 1 at the center. 2 at the side, 1 at the center. Wal mashyu qaddamaha bi qurbiha. Wal mashyu qaddamaha bi qurbiha. So when comes to walking, the person walks in front of the janazah. So now we have two at the sides. Two at the sides. So we have four. One at the front. One is at the front. And then it is a sunnah to do isra. Isra meaning to walk in a fast manner. Why in a fast manner? Because when comes to janazah, the best is to be fast. Fast in terms of bathing, in terms of shrouding, everything has to be fast. This is the sunnah. Because it is makruh to delay janazah. This is the thing. Whenever a person pass away, the sunnah is to do it quickly, not to delay. Because delay can result in what? In decaying. Delay can result in decaying. And if the janazah, for example, is a good janazah, we are depriving the janazah of the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mercies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is awaiting him. So that's why it is a sunnah to haste in terms of fulfilling all these rights when it comes to the deceased. So it is a sunnah to do isra, to make it fast, not a sunnah to delay. Likewise, when it comes to walking, when we are carrying janazah, it is a sunnah to walk fast, but not to such an extent that it will result in people falling down and all these things. But it is a walking that is faster than usual. This is a sunnah. وَيُكْرَهُ اللَّغَةُ فِيهَا. It is makruh to speak about things that are not important. To speak about things that are not important. Like nowadays, when you go to janazah, for example, we find people speaking about football, people speaking about what is going on in the news and all these things. But what is the sunnah is to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remember death. It is a sunnah to take lessons from the situation that this person has passed away and he is returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what is going to be the situation, and what is the type of adhkar that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam recommended us to recite. To recite Yasin, for example, to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. We engage ourselves in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's makruh to engage ourselves with things that does not give us any benefit. وَاتِّبَاعُهَا بِالنَّارِ. This is makruh, to use fire, and this is one of the things that is done by the pagans last time. So it is makruh to use fire and to bring janazah with fire. وَاتِّبَاعُ النِّسَاءِ. In the mazhab al-Imam Shafi'i, it is makruh. This is the thing that you have to put down. It is makruh if there is no mixing. If there is no mixing, any makruh. But if there is mixing, haram. If there is mixing, haram. And most of the janazah in our country, lil asaf, most of the janazah, there's free mixing. Most of the janazah that we have been to, you will not, it's very difficult to find a janazah that there is no mixing between men and women. You see, especially when the janazah is brought down into the grave, you will find that everybody will want to see it. Everybody. So the woman and men, they will stand by each other and to look at the janazah. And this is something that is rampant in our society. Now, this is not permissible. This is not permissible. It is makruh for women. This is mazhab Imam Shafi'i. Mazhab Imam Shafi'i. Some other mazhab that mention is haram. That woman go to the grave. Not permissible. At the day of death. At the day of death. Why? Because normally when women when they go into the grave, they will raise their voice in crying, because sometimes they cannot control their emotion at the day of death. Due to this, it is not permissible for women to go to the grave, because by women going into the grave, it will be the reason that they commit ma'siyah, they commit sin. So it is better that they do not go. So it is makruh for them to go. Makruh for them to go. This is in a situation, that's what we mentioned, if there is no mixing. But if there is any mixing, it becomes haram. So that is why a lot of ulama do not encourage any woman to go to the grave at the day of death. At the day of death, we should not let the woman go to the grave. They can stay at home. There is no need to go there is no need to go to the grave. Because another thing also we have to understand, this person has just passed away, he is in need of dua and zikr. But if we do ma'siyah on the grave, now this becomes a problem for the deceased. because the deceased is in need of dua. The deceased is in need of people supplicating for them. But if the situation is such that people are committing ma'siyah with this free mixing and all these things, dua becomes mahjub, that's become hijab, that the dua might not be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all these things will be a burden for the deceased. That is why it is not encouraged at all for women to go to the grave at the day of death, especially because we have the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet prohibited women to cry aloud, to beat their faces, to tear away their clothes. This is the practice of Jahiliyyah. So if this there is a possibility of all these things happening, it is haram for them to go to the graveyard. Then the author mentioned about the janazah prayer. So alhamdulillah, we have covered bathing the deceased, we have covered shrouding of the deceased. So we understand the minimal obligation of shrouding, the sunnahs in shrouding. Then the author speaks about the janazah prayer. So once we have bathed, we have shrouded the deceased, so now it is time to perform the prayers. So he mentioned the integrals of the janazah prayers, they are 7. Faslun arkanu salatil mayyiti sab'atun. There are 7. Al-awwal an-niyyatu ka ghayriha. Number 1, of course, is the intention. So since janazah prayers is fard, we have to differentiate between what is fard and what is sunnah. So when we make our intention, we must include fardiyah. We say usalli fard al-janazah. Usalli fard al-janazah. Ala hadha al-mayyit. I make the intention of obligatory prayer for this disease. For this disease. We can add arba takbirat. Then we say makmuman lillahi ta'ala. So this is the intention. Some people add fard kifaya, can also. A person, for example, he say usalli fard usalli fard al-janazati ala hadha al-mayyit kifayatan. Sometimes we make that kind of intention, but the word fard suffices. Usalli fard al-janaza ala hadha al-mayyit arba takbirat imaman or ma'muman lillahi ta'ala. But what is important is that we must understand that this janazah prayer is fard. It's fard kifaya. Fard kifaya, not sunnah. Some people thought in janazah prayers is sunnah. So this is the first thing. So the author mentioned ghayriha. Ghayriha meaning the conditions of intention. Intention we intend when we are doing the takbir. So when we do the first takbir, Allahu Akbar, we intend with the intention. So all the conditions of takbir comes into place. So this is what he mentioned, karayriha, an-niyatu karayriha. Asani arba'u takbirat. Number 2 is 4 takbir. So janazah prayers we have 4 takbir. As-salis qira'atul Fatiha. Recitation of Suratul Fatiha. And notice the author did not say qira'atul Fatiha fi takbiratul ula. The author did not specify the first takbir, because in the Madhab Imam Shafi, recitation of Fatiha is not necessary in the first takbir. It's not necessary in the first takbir, but it must be done in any of the takbir. It must be done in any of the takbir, and this is the prevailing judgment in our madhab. Although there is khilaf, there are opinion that says that wajib to be done in the first takbir. So normally we do in the first takbir. Normally we recite Fatiha when in the first takbir. Now, number 4, he said, وَرَابِعُ الْقِيَامُ لِلْقَادِرِ. That when a person is doing the janazah prayers, that he must stand up, if he has the capacity to do so, just like in normal prayers. If he sits down, then it is not valid, because this is fard. Janazah prayers is wajib. So wajib meaning for us to stand, when we have the ability to stand. Al-Khamis as-salatu ala nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam ba'da thaniyah. To make salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after the second takbir. And this is specifically for the second takbir. To make salawat of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, minimum when we say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And all these things we have to learn. If you do not know this, our prayers will not be valid. As-sadis ad-du'a lil mayyit ba'da as-salisah. And this is the thing that is important. After the third takbir, there must be specification and in terms of dua for the deceased. Minimum we say Allahumma ighfir lahu. Allahumma ighfir lahu. Yani if the deceased is a man, Allahumma ighfir laha. If the deceased is a woman. So this is the minimum dua. Allahumma ighfir lahu warhamhu. Normally we say what? Allahumma ighfir lahu warhamhu wa'afihi wa'fu anhu. But the minimum we make dua specifically to the deceased by saying Allahumma ighfir lahu, for example. So this is wajib. This is an integral. So if we do not make dua, our prayer will not be valid. If we do not know this, our prayer will not be valid. And dua has to be in Arabic. It cannot be in Malay or English. Otherwise the prayer becomes invalidated. So no choice, we have to memorize. No choice, we have to memorize. So sometimes what normally people do before the start of janazah prayers, there will be a crash course. The imam will begin speaking about the integrals. So how we make the intention, and then we recite Fatiha in the first takbir. And this is encouraged because normally some people they do not know. At least they have some knowledge. First takbir and you recite Fatiha. Second takbir, make sure you make salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ, because sometimes people forget. The third takbir recite this dua, Allahumma ighfir lahu. Woman is deceased, Allahumma ighfir laha. Okay, then khalas. The fourth takbir, what you call it, there is no any obligation to recite dua, but it is encouraged that we recite any dua, the prophetic dua, or dua from the Quran. So the author mentioned wa dua lil mayyiti ba'da salisati. This is number 6. Number 7, as-sabi as-salam. So normally after the fourth takbir we do our salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Janazah prayer sunnah for us to add wa barakatuhu. This is the opinion of Sheikh ibn Hajar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Only in janazah prayers. Naam. So normally this is what we do normally. We recite that kind of salam. So these are the 7 integrals when it comes to janazah prayers. So all of us have to memorize, because normally we will perform in janazah prayers occasionally. So all these things must be understood. So now when we go on, the author mentioned wa yusannu raf'u yadayhi fi takbirat. And when it comes into the sunnah, it is a sunnah to raise our hands every time we make the takbir. So we make 4 takbir, 4 times and we raise our hands. Naam, wal israru wa ta'awudhu dun al istiftah. It is a sunnah for janazah prayers, israr, we recite silently. And to recite the ta'awuz, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. This is before we recite Surah Al-Fatiha. And it is not a sunnah to recite istiftah. Why? Because janazah prayers is designed for a brief prayer. As what we mentioned just now, it is a sunnah to hasten with the janazah, not to delay. So once we bathe janazah, perform all these things are based on what? On briefly, on brevity. So it is not any sunnah to recite dua istiftah. وَيُشْتَرَطُ فِيهَا شُرُوطُ الصَّلَاةِ. So all the conditions in your prayers are applied to janazah prayers. When it comes to tahara, for example, it is wajib that the person must be in the state of tahara, facing of the qibla, recitation of the Fatiha must be correct, salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All these as like the conditions of prayers. وَيُصَلِّي عَلَى الْغَائِبِ وَالْمَدْفُونِ مَنْ كَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ فَرْضِ الصَّلَاةِ عَلَيْهِ يَوْمَ الْمَوْتِ إِلَّا عَلَى النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So the author mentioned that it is permissible to perform on the deceased that is not present. The deceased that is not present. Of course, with conditions. The condition is that the deceased must not be in that same town or city. The deceased is in overseas. Then we can perform janazah ra'ib if the bathing has been done. If the bathing has been done, then you can perform in janazah ra'ib. Meaning it is not necessary that the deceased must be in front of us. But if we are in the same town as the deceased, same country, now we cannot perform the ra'ib prayers. We have to perform prayers by the deceased. By the deceased. And then the author and he mentioned something else. The author and he mentioned wal madfuni man kana min ahli fardhi salati alayh. It is permissible to perform janazah prayers to someone who has been buried, for many years, with the condition that when he passes away, the person who is performing the prayers must be in a state where prayers is compulsory upon him. So what does it mean? Yani, if you have reached puberty and you are performing any prayers, somebody passed away, for example. Somebody passed away. 10 years later, you want to perform janazah prayers for that person, because you have not performed janazah prayers on the day of death. 10 years later, you want to perform the janazah prayers on that person. It is permissible. Why? Because on the day of death of this person, you have reached puberty, and you have reached a state where prayers is compulsory upon you. Then only you can perform any janazah prayers for the deceased. But if you are only 2 years old, for example, this person passed away, and then when you are 20 years old and you want to perform any prayers, janazah prayers for that person, then it's not permissible, because on the day of death you have not reached mukallaf. You have not reached any puberty. Prayers has not been made obligatory upon you. Then you cannot perform the prayers for the deceased. But there is an exception. The author mentioned illa ala nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yani it is not any permissible yani for a person to pray at the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is specifically for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Prophet mentioned, do not make my grave as a place of prayer, as a place of prayer. So that is why our scholars mentioned it is not any permissible. It is not permissible. So he mentioned min ahli fardi salati alayhi yawm al-mawti illa ala nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa awla an-nas bis salah alayhi asabatuhu summa zawul arham. Then the author mentioned the best person to perform the janazah prayers is the asabat. What is any asabat? Asabat is a male relatives. For example, a person passed away. He has a son. The son, it better for the son to perform the prayers. If he doesn't have a son but he has a father, for example, the father performs the imam as the imam. Likewise, if there is no father, then we look, is there any siblings, male siblings of the deceased? The male siblings perform. If the male siblings are not there, nephews, are there nephews from the male? Yes, there is. Okay, this person becomes just like faraid. When it comes to asaba, just like in faraid, the son goes back to the father or the grandfather, and then the siblings, and then the uncles, the al-a'mam, the paternal uncles. If not their sons, the nephews of the paternal uncles. So this is the meaning of asaba. Asaba is basically the male relatives. So when it comes into janazah prayers, the best to perform the janazah prayers are the male relatives. But normally when a person passes away, that is not the case. The family members, for example, they will let the imam of the masjid, and he becomes the imam and all these things. But in reality, it is the family members that the best to perform janazah prayers is a family member. That is why it is important for us to study all this, so that if any of our family members pass away, we know who is the best person to perform. And of course, our scholars mentioned about the wisdom, because family members who perform janazah prayers, the dua will be more sincere, rather than a person who has no relationship with the deceased. To him, he is a normal person. But imagine if a person, the father passes away and the son becomes the imam. Imagine the dua of the son in prayers. Imagine the dua of the son in prayer. Certainly the dua will be a dua that is based on a sincere heart. So that is why it is better for the family members to perform the prayers, become the imam. But if there is no asaba, he says zawul arham. Zawul arham is basically relatives, any relatives. Relatives, for example, the maternal side. The paternal side, and they don't have any paternal side, but they have the maternal side. Khalas, we give to the maternal side. Or other family members, for example, the son of the nephew, or the relatives of the uncle, or relatives of the siblings. This is people who have blood connection with the deceased. Wala yurassalu shahid. Then the author mentioned it is not permissible to bathe the shaheed. But of course, we need to understand the definition of Shaheed. In Fathul Mu'in, for example, the author mentions a lot about the definition of the Shaheed. You can refer to Fathul Mu'in, for example, when he speaks about the Shaheed. Here in Muqaddimah Hadramiyyah, and is very brief. So the meaning of Shaheed here is Shaheed Dunya and Akhirah. Shaheed Dunya and Akhirah. Yani a person who dies in the battlefield, fighting the enemies who are non-Muslims, not Muslims. But if the enemies are Muslims, it is not any Shaheed Dunya and Akhirah. That it carries any different ruling. So all these are so many of the conditions. So a person was killed by the enemy in the battlefield with all the conditions. We say this person is a Shaheed, and the cause of the battle is fi sabilillah, not because of anything else. Then this person, we say this is Shaheed Dunya and Akhirah. So it is not permissible for us to bathe him. It is not permissible for us to perform prayers for him. So he mentioned a few conditions. He said, "Wala yusalla alayhi wa huwa man mata fi qital al-kuffar." Who is the Shaheed? He said, "Man mata fi qital al-kuffar bisababihi." Yani a person who fights in the battlefield against any enemies of non-Muslims. Enemies that are non-Muslims, and for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of deen, not for the sake of dunya, for the sake of the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in our history, for example, there are major battles that take place during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, during the times of Khulafa ar-Rashidin. So that is why it is important for us to study history. During the time of Salahuddin Ayyubi and the Crusades and all these things, for us to understand which battle is considered to be jihad and which is not jihad, which is fi sabilillah, which is not fi sabilillah. Because some battles also, it is not fi sabilillah. It is because of something else. So that it cannot be the cause of Shaheed. So he mentioned, no, it is not permissible to bathe him, not permissible to perform prayers for him, and not permissible to shroud unless the aura is not covered. Unless the aura is not covered. It is not permissible to wipe away the blood. Not permissible to wash him, to wipe away the blood. Because all these things becomes a witness for him yawm al-qiyamah. Wala ala siqat. Then the author mentioned about a siqat. Yani a siqat is basically what we call it miscarriage. Miscarriage. So the author mentioned wala ala siqati illa idha zaharat amaratul hayati kal ikhtilaj. So now, imagine a woman, for example, is suffering from a disease, and the woman is affected. So when the child was delivered, if there are signs of life, khalas, we say this, we have to perform the normal rituals. If there is signs of life. He gave an example, kal ikhtilaj. What is any ikhtilaj? Yani movement of the body. Signs of life. So it is wajib for us to bathe him, to do kafan, to pray for him, and to bury. All must be done. Just like if a person is a normal person. No difference. There is a poem he says that says, As-siqatu kal-kabiri idha zaharat amaratul hayati. As-siqatu kal-kabiri idha zaharat amaratul hayati. The ruling of a woman of miscarriage carries the ruling of an adult if there are signs of life. So here the author given the example ikhtilaj. Some scholars mention kalbuka. For example, the baby came out and then there is a bit of cry, then pass away. So we say this must be bathed, must be kafan, and must be prayers, and it's compulsory to perform any prayers, because now it takes the ruling of an adult. But if the baby comes out, then he dead. Here we have any differences amongst the fuqaha. So when it came out dead, and we look at the number of months, how many months? Al-Imam Ramli, for example, and he said anything that is more than 6 months, anything that is more than 6 months, we consider what you call it to be the same any ruling any as the adult. Any, it is compulsory any to bathe him, compulsory any to perform any prayers any for him. But Sheikh any Ibn Hajar any say no. At the end of the day, we look any at the situation any of the child any that comes out, whether it comes out in the state of alive or not alive. We do not any take into consideration number of months. This is any one of the difference any between Sheikh Ibn Hajar and Imam Ramli. Imam Ramli any gave any 6 months. Imam Ramli any gave 6 months. Now, anything that is below any 4 months, of course, any 4 months any the soul any has not any been blown into. So normally any there will be no life. So what you call it, performing any of the prayers any is not any compulsory. But the thing also that we have to understand that if the body any has been developed, the body parts any have been developed, it is compulsory any to do shrouding and to perform any the burial. But when comes any to prayers, and this is where we are speaking about, when comes into performing the janazah prayers, there must be life. There must be life. So if any there is any no life, then there is no janazah prayers. In the opinion of Sheikh Ibn Hajar, Imam Ramli mentioned anything that is more than 6 months, any we regard any as what do you call it? Yani an adult. وَيُغَسَّلُ إِنْ بَلَغَ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ. If it reaches any 4 months, we have any to do the bathing, but not necessarily the prayers. So when it comes into the prayers, any there are differences. So the prevailing any judgment is that if there are signs any of life, then only when we perform any prayers. If there is no sign of life, we do not any perform any of the prayers. But it is wajib any to perform the bathing if it is more than 4 months, and likewise any the shrouding. So I hope any it is clear, inshallah ta'ala. So for today, inshallah, any we will stop here. In our next any lesson, any we will speak any about dafn, yani burying of the deceased. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adhaban nar. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.